Hello everybody. Today I have a very special guest with me. He's a well-renowned architect. He's a mentor, tutor at Glenn Murcutt Master Class and Student Master Class in Australia, and also a lot of master classes for students around the world. He runs his own architectural studio. He won a lot of awards domestically and abroad. He's, I guess, the only one who managed to have published a tent in a prominent architectural magazine, General Architecture, and many other houses as well. He's professor at the university, and he's also a person whom, although we met every 7 years, obviously, I dare to call a dear friend. He's the guy who basically turned my world upside down at one point of my life. And I'm really, really glad that I'm able to have him here as a guest at this Architects Dialogues podcast. Peter Stutchbury, welcome to my humble studio.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Right. So I have heard a lot of your lectures, obviously, and I know quite a lot about you, but never enough. And I wanted to frame this conversation to dig into some areas maybe which are not so well known. Till now, I already heard a lot of your anecdotes from your youth. Just recently, one with the water, which we might come later back. But I wanted to ask you for start, how did your early or children years look like? Because I would really like to know what shaped you into the person you are today and architect you are today.
I was born into a lower middle class family with a father who had incredible energy and ability, and around pre-Second World War, he took a pay cut to join the private sector from the Commonwealth, from the government, which in those days was significant. I think his pay went from £5 6 a week to £4 20 or something. And I had a mother who, he was an engineer, had a mother who was a philosopher and a musician. She didn't study philosophy, but her mother was a remarkable woman who spent a lot of her time working with the disadvantaged people of Sydney, mainly the Indigenous people, which no white people did in those days.
Okay.
Not many. And I think that's where my yearning for working with those communities came from originally, even though I only found out about it recently. So my parents built the house that we lived in as young children, and it was in an area that was newly being developed in Sydney next to a national park. And the national park was our playground. Also, we had no definition of backyards. So
you had no definition.
No definition of backyards.
Okay,
so backyards just all mingled together.
Okay.
And I could quite easily sneak up to Mr. Tomlinson's backyard and pinch a few tomatoes out of the garden. which I did. And he knew about it, but I was unaware of that. My father used to come home from work. He worked incredibly hard. He was a very deliberate man. He had incredible people skills, and he'd work all day. Then he'd come home and go to the garage and work until 9 or 10 o'clock at night, building things, from boats to billy carts to fittings for cars to anything that needed fabricating. He would make in the garage or in the workshop at work. So when he started, after building the house, when he started work, he started sweeping the floors and doing tech college, which is a sort of tertiary education, doing tech college at night time. And through that process, he qualified to be an engineer. He had to also look after his family because his father had died quite young. And he eventually, after 30 years, became the CEO of a very big energy company. And he became a world authority on energy and energy consumption and energy manufacturing. He travelled mainly to Germany and America doing these things. My mother, on the other hand, played the organ in church every Sunday for 56 years. And she was the woman who said to me once, when I asked her, age 19, Mum, why did you take us to the country so much? She said, I wanted you to have the knowledge of the city, but the truth of the country.
Oh, beautiful.
So she was the one that managed our aesthetic lives. Dad was the one that managed our practical lives. So throughout our childhood and up until, I guess, late teens, she was always there for the two boys that were her family. Our playground was a national park, quite a big national park. But our real playground, our real place of learning was the family farm, my uncle's farm, which is still in the family and which we still visit regularly to this day, assisting and helping with some building work or whatever. But you either flew there by Fokker Friendship, which is a two-propeller aeroplane, and we'd land in the town of Cobar. We'd stay in the men's shop that evening because we knew the people who owned the men's shop, and then we'd drive the 2 or 3 hours out to the property from the town after getting supplies. Or we would drive out there, but in those days it was a 15-hour drive immediately west of Sydney. It was a wonderful drive, but I think demanding on Mum.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And she was the one that took the initiative in terms of our country education. So she felt that the experiences we're having in semi-arid desert out near the Darling River in Western New South Wales were equally, if not more, of more value than the ones we're having in the city. As a young child, there would be food carts going up and down the street, and we'd go out and buy our vegetables from them. Refrigeration had only just really come into being, so supermarkets were starting. My mother would look at items on the shelves and get the best value items, not just buy anything. It was a period of struggling for our family until my father became highly recognised for his work and therefore remunerated as well. In my teen years, I was sent to a private school, which was almost the end of me. It completely dismantled my keen eye for life and the eye that had developed through our travels in Western New South Wales. And if it wasn't for my mother and a dear school friend who remains my friend to this day, I think those years could have been pretty destructive in a real sense. So my memory of school was not good. It was simply that I was attending school in order to get a further education, not enjoying it that much. So I played sport. I surfed the ocean a lot. I was a surfboard rider. And I found my true escape, my emotional, spiritual escape, out on this family farm where we were taught to work extremely hard. We'd get up at dawn and we'd go to bed at dusk. And we'd work in between time. So, you know, it was 12-hour days and hard work for a young man. Very hard work, putting in fencing in hard ground or, you know, being on a horse or a motorbike for 3 to 4 days, bringing sheep in. It was 100,000 acres, still is. And so when
it's
you went...
unimaginable in our
it's
country.
Huge.
Yeah.
It's a big country. It's half the size of the national park where we were teaching. It's actually half the area size of that park.
Okay.
So, but what you learnt when you were doing that, unknowingly learnt, was the clues, the guidelines, the patterns, the legibility of nature. Because you would arrive in a paddock that might be, say, 2,000, 3,000 acres. And my cousin would go, there's 200 or 400 sheep in there, bring them out and I'll meet you at the gate. And that exercise, depending on the type of paddock, whether it was thick with vegetation or more sparse or whatever, could take anything between, say, 3 hours and 7 hours, depending on the paddock itself. It was a demanding and deeply learned exercise.
What do you mean? Deeply learned?
Well, you could not perform that exercise without understanding the movement of animals, understanding where animals might hide or might be, understanding the landscape, because the landscape was your not only topography, but it was your map of where you were. So as you understood the landscape, you understood where you were in that paddock, which you would otherwise be lost. So the sun became an important asset to your navigation, but also tracks on the ground, also the contours of the land, which because it's desert, you can only just pick that up. And also markers like erosion ditches and fence lines and things, you know. And also what we find out there is the flora changes subtly as you move through the desert. You know, it's never identical flora. And I think we have like 18 shifts in flora on the property. So you know when you hit another composition in terms of flora, you understand where you are, because it has to do with drainage and soil type. So it became, that's what I mean by learn it. You had to learn all those things. You had to, my Uncle Harry was a baker, but he had a good sense of those things. Whereas my cousin Stuart, who ran the farm, never really became part of that understanding. He was efficient and effective, but I really learned from my uncle and my auntie how to read the landscape and how to make reading the landscape bring more economy into your life. So it was a very educational upbringing in terms of life outside school. It was emotionally a very difficult education inside school, from about year 8 through to year 11. And but the strange but wonderful thing that happened at the end of all that was, because my heart wasn't in academic education, but more in learning from the ocean and learning from the desert, which I did deliberately and religiously. You know, I would do trips up and down the coast surfing, and I'd go out to the farm at least 3 times a year. I didn't do particularly well at school.
So what if I may interrupt you, what was, you said it was disturbing in school? What disturbed you so much?
Yeah, I was outwardly bullied for 3 years.
Ah, okay. So it was not maybe school per se, but...
I was doing quite well at school up until that point, and then I think when you're being bullied, you drop anything that might cause that to happen. So you might drop your ability in a subject, you might drop the way you gather friends, you might drop storytelling, you might just become almost an infigment of your imagination, you know, almost something that doesn't exist, but for the physical presence. So that was a difficult period, very, very difficult period. And as I say, as a consequence, I didn't do well at school, not very well at all actually. I started off doing well and then took up other interests. So when it came the time to select a profession, I found that incredibly disorientating. I'd never considered what would sustain me for the rest of my life. Not to the point of making a decision, anyway. So I registered for some fairly rudimentary and uninspiring courses like commerce and economics, and
I can feel it.
I got accepted into commerce. And in those days, you'd receive a telegram. My mother sent the telegram to a post office about 8 hours north of where we lived, because I was surfing up there with some friends. And it said simply, you must come back to register for university. So I hitchhiked back. It took me a day, I think, to get back, or a day and a half. And I went out to New South Wales University and I stood in the queue for 2 hours. And I got to the front of the queue and the little lady behind the desk looked at me and said, "So what are you going to do for the rest of your life?" And I looked at her and I said, "Not commerce." And I walked out of the queue and there was a table about the size of this table full of books, career books.
What kind of? Career
books.
Sorry, yeah.
And I picked one up and it was a green book about this big, and the first word was accounting and the next word was architecture. And it's like it jumped out of the page at me. It just sprung out of the page. Because all my life I'd had a propensity to draw. You know, there was something inside me. My great uncle was a bridge designer and builder.
Oh.
He used to take teams of people out to rivers and build bridges over them, and some of them still stand. He built quite a famous bridge over the Parramatta River. And on my father's side, a lot of the relatives were builders and joiners. So, and then in our evenings down in the garage with Dad, quite often we'd convince him to build us billy carts, which is small little mobile carts.
Okay.
With a variety of wheels depending on how fast you want it to go. And we had a lot of experience with that, but also he used to bring home from work, because his work was building power stations, energy power stations, and so they get a lot of things delivered from overseas in crates, in timber crates, and he'd bring all the timber and the crates home, and we'd make little cubby houses in the backyard, tree houses and houses in the corner and houses for neighbours. We were, over the period of maybe 10 years, we might have made 15 different houses.
Okay.
And we used to occupy the houses, and he would sit back and ask us how we were going to structurally hold those houses up and maintain their reliability in a tree or on the back fence or whatever. It was very, in retrospect, I've never talked much about that, but I'm sure that had a big impact on my appreciation of space, but also appreciation of structure. He was very big on structure. The other thing that happened in that first house was my father wasn't happy with the house he'd built, which he'd copied the plan from a project team and adapted it a little bit. So he built on the back of the house a room that we began to refer to as the sunroom, which was a glass room, the flat roof, and sliding windows with no frames, and a low wall to enclose the room that just enables you to put a bed against it with a mattress, but then the window started. So a low sill. And that room really was the focus of our family. That's where our family spent their happiest and most celebratory time, in that room. And I think that room taught me the joy of connecting with the landscape or connecting with the place, because the rest of our house was very English traditional, unfortunately, except with the exception of a pergola and some canvas blinds. But this sunroom was maybe 6 metres by 10 metres, so quite a big space.
Oh, a lot? Oh, okay. And I imagined smaller one when you said another. That's a huge space.
It had a porch off it. It had the piano. My mother would play the piano almost every night.
Beautiful.
It had sleeping accommodation, and it had storage for all our games and toys, etc. So once we'd finished dinner, we'd go straight to the sunroom and spend our hours either in the garage with Dad or in the sunroom with ourselves.
Who slept in this sunroom? You said it had bed.
I used to sleep there illegally. That is, I had my own bedroom, but I loved sleeping in the sunroom. There was 2 sleeping platforms there. So I'd often prefer to sleep in the sunroom. And when we had guests, I'd definitely sleep in the sunroom. So it was, and then it was very interesting, because we're in a newly developed area of Sydney. Slowly, other people saw the worth of this room that hadn't been imagined in Australian housing that I could see, and started putting sunrooms on their houses. I think after Dad put this one on, which shows his perception actually, but after he put it on, 3 of our neighbours put sunrooms on their houses in different ways. You know, 3 of a neighbourhood of 8 or 9, 10 houses. So then, once I realised that architecture was a summary of this upbringing. It was a summary of reading the landscape. It was a summary of the simple tech drawings I did of a night time. I used to do cartoons and things, not of people, but of activities. It was a summary of building cubby houses and building things down the garage and in the backyard. It was a summary of Mum's education to us in music and humanity. You know, she really spent her life looking after other people. So she had great care for other people. I then decided to do architecture, but of course I hadn't studied hard enough, so it was very difficult to get into a course of architecture, and I ended up going north to a regional university whose mark for admission was a lot lower, and being admitted there. And that was possibly one of the best things that ever happened to me, because I then removed myself from my Sydney environment, which had had all that unfortunate history, and I started afresh, and I could grow again.
Yeah, so
it's quite a lot to take in.
No, yeah. I mean, but it was really interesting to hear from where these fantastic observational skills of yours are coming from. And when you mentioned that the national park was your playground, I always remember a photograph you showed on many of your lectures where you are with some van or something camping. Yeah. Do you remember that one? Yeah, that was there, I suppose.
Well, that was actually on a surfing holiday.
Okay.
Because we would just stop anywhere in the landscape and set up a camp and have something to eat, and then get up pre-dawn and surf the ocean.
Okay.
For as long as we could last before we became exhausted, depending on the size of the waves. But it was bohemic, my upbringing, in terms of what I did outside the formality of living. But it was highly educational, and it was educational because in order to be most effective and most efficient, you had to understand where you were and how you could manage that, you know. You couldn't make decisions that delayed your process. You could, but you were quite conscious of the fact that your process was being delayed.
Right.
So, and what I mean by that is in order for us to surf and come across the best waves, because we used to watch the charts, and when the cyclones hit Northern Australia, we knew that if we got in the car and drove for 2 days, we'd get the cyclone waves, right? So if you didn't know, firstly, where you could stop on the way and how long for, and when's the best time to strategically drive through cities and all that, you'd never arrive at the right time and you'd miss the waves. It was a 2-day drive, so, you know, it was important to start making thoughtful, planned decisions. And the same when we're on the farm, you know, like, I loved being on a motorbike, gathering sheep in through the landscape and moving them through the landscape to a holding pen or water or whatever. But I got frustrated when I knew it was taking a lot longer than it should have. And I think in general that's a good lesson, that you learn to be efficient with your time and your thinking and your management of all those issues that affect efficiency.
Yeah, I would agree with that, of course. And now I also know from where your one of those booklets, from where your detailed drawings originate. I saw in one of those but I don't know, maybe, is it here or maybe some other? Never mind. Oh yeah, no, these are spatial drawings, but there are also some.
Well, I could honestly say that I learnt
from your father.
from my father. He was a technical draftsman as well.
Yeah, you see.
Yeah.
Because I was already admiring when I was staying at your place and how you detail everything and you show us is in your studio.
Yeah.
When you prepared everything for the publishing, how detailed the drawings are thought of and planned. But, by the way, thanks for that. Beautiful.
Okay.
And one more thing before we move on. You said that your mother played piano every evening,
Most
of the days,
yeah.
And she also gave to your upbringing the humanist part.
Yeah.
But you also mentioned at the beginning that she was the one, I don't know how you put it exactly in words, but doing aesthetic part in your family. What you meant by that?
Well, Dad was the practitioner, you know. He practiced what his art was, which was engineering. So everything had logic with that.
Okay.
Which I believe is a very good thing for an architect, to have logic in your work. And part of my frustration these days is, you know, so much architecture is illogical and therefore has no reference to either its place or its making or its ethos. But she was able to make us, me and my brother, aware of the things that contribute towards beauty. So how one understands beauty in a very humanistic way. So, you know, she'd point out the mother caring for the young child, or she'd point out not draining water incorrectly in the landscape to cause erosion. You know, she'd point out things that allowed you to understand, I think, the origins of beauty. You know, not beauty in the sense that most people would appreciate, but beauty as a truly emotional thing. So that when you sense it, or when you see it, or when you experience it, it lifts your soul, you know, it lifts your appreciation of whatever it is that beauty is enhancing. And she was very good at that. She was very good at of seeing the good in people. She never saw the bad in people. I can't remember any time that she ever commented truly adversely about people. And she was very good at of bringing to life a situation that might otherwise be usual or normal. So for instance, when we went outside to buy vegetables from the truck that was going up the hill, she'd turn that into a ceremony, you know. I think I can hear the truck. Who's going to get the money off the counter? You know. Now remember, when you go out there, to thank Mr. Greenwell, because he's come all the way from Lane Cove from the market gardens. And she'd weave a story for buying vegetables.
Great.
So that when you got to the truck, you felt like you were not just part of storytelling, but part of human endeavour in a funny way. And so she was able to put that sort of magic into, you know, like when we going out to the farm was a long day. It was, but you know, every step of the way she turned it into a little piece of appreciative magic. So that's what I mean by her aesthetic ability. It wasn't her, she wasn't a great painter or anything like that. She was a great musician. She was an amazing musician. She could listen to a tune and repeat it on the piano. And in fact, my daughter, who is inherited that ability, said to me recently, Grandma taught me how to hear and play music in a way no one else has ever shown me. So she had quite, you know, but she always undersold herself, my mother. She never big-noted herself. She always took the humble side of any praise that might come her way. Oh, thank you very much, but you know, there's a lot of people that have contributed to that sort of thing. She's a very good person. She only died 2 years ago, age 101.
Oh, wow. Good.
And she, you know, she carried us all the way to her death. Even in death, she was carrying us. It was quite remarkable. You know, her mind was going and all that, but the way she managed it by, you know, managing our emotions and saying that she was quite content, you know, that everyone else should. It was just, it's been a huge life lesson.
You said she played piano. Do you play some instruments as well?
I used to play brass instruments.
Okay.
Because my mother wanted my lungs to get better. Apparently I had not so good lungs. But I didn't have good concentration. And I think to play instruments and to sing or anything like that, you need very good concentration. Also to read, you need good concentration.
You would say for yourself that you don't have the concentration?
I think I have concentration now.
Okay.
Because
I would say that as well.
I think we need to develop the things we're inadequate in, you know, in order to have an open chessboard, you know, where you can move anywhere you want to move rather than being isolated by two pieces.
Right.
Your understanding of two pieces. So no, I certainly addressed the issues that were undernourished. Yeah.
Because I would say that you have great concentration, of course, and great, not just concentration, I would say awareness. Your awareness always amazes me in every situation. I mean, there are situations, obviously, when my awareness is higher and lower and something happens unexpectedly, whatever. And for me, it goes like this, but I would say that your awareness is always at the peak.
I've had great teachers for awareness.
I also have great teachers. Yeah. So you then entered this university, I mean Faculty of Architecture, I don't know how you call it that, Faculty University.
Yeah.
Yeah. Was that there something which you would say to emphasize what that really marked you as an architect, or it was just a study and?
No, when I first started at Newcastle, I was one of the students, definitely. I had an enthusiasm and I had a burning desire to be an architect, once discovered, but I wasn't performing any better or any worse than anyone else, relatively. But in my first year, because I was finally allowed the opportunity to be myself without judgment or anything remotely destructive happening around me, I probably explored that opportunity too much, and that we had 10 subjects in first year, and I did, I had a high distinction in a few and a distinction in a few, but I failed 3 subjects. Structures, maths and physics. Structures, maths and physics. Our structures teacher, I have to say, is not someone I was overly fond of. But that really pulled me up, that failure. That really hit me hard. And I was sitting in my studio. I had to re-sit in the year 1 studio while all my friends went to the year 2 studio across the hall. And it was a different experience to school, but it was very much a conscious shift in my responsibilities as a person. And from then on, I took university incredibly seriously. I was very, very fortunate to have remarkable teachers. I had 3 or 4 really supportive and deep teachers who would often sit with me after school and discuss all sorts of topics that were sometimes well outside architecture, more to do with where the world's heading and how we might, as architects, address that, and all sorts of issues. One of them was a chap who was well known in the Sydney School of Architecture, and he decided to leave that very audible environment and live in a caravan on 25 acres in the bush and come and be a professor during the day. He was a really wonderful man. Another one was a landscape artist who taught us drawing and art, who was a beautiful person. And then the other one was a fellow who had a doctorate in daylight and ventilation. And he wrote one of the first books on daylight and ventilation in the world, really, in terms of natural passive architecture. And he's still alive, and I'm due to see him in 6 or 7 weeks when I get back. But he opened our eyes to how one passively manages buildings to be more comfortable, with all sorts of techniques he used. And so those 3 were my principal professors, but also inspirations to work hard, and I always cross-reference my work with them. And then there were secondary guys who were very good at what they did. It was a remarkable period in that university's history. And the dean at the time, head of school dean at the time, was just the nicest man. And he opened doors for me that people said could never be opened. He was very, very generous and very supportive. And I think because, from about 3rd year onwards, I'd shown a real dedication to how one is educated in architecture. I'd sort of started to divert a little bit off the mainstream at that point. And my 3rd year thesis was designing a woolshed for shearing sheep. Most other ones were either high-rise buildings or libraries or whatever. And then in my 4th year, I studied zoo design, so designing a zoo for Australian animals. So I would go out into the landscape and I'd not live with the animals, but I'd camp in their environment and learn how they managed their landscape, their place, their micro and macro environments. And then I designed a zoo for them, for animals, in Western New South Wales, where we're now hopefully about to build a tourism centre 45 years later
Oh,
in that
really?
exact town.
Great.
Yeah, Aboriginal tourist centre that we won by national competition. Funny how things, but it's very close to the zoo where I designed a couple of shelters and they built one of them. I went out to the zoo and I stayed there and I worked with the people.
You actually did the zoo or just...
No,
it was your...
I designed a zoo for my fourth year thesis.
Okay.
Takes a whole year.
Yeah.
I studied Australian animals and how they live
Okay.
and how they have adapted to living in Australia and with other animals, which was a very significant step in learning about Australia. And I'd see these animals on the farm all the time, snakes and lizards and eagles and emus and kangaroos, and I understood their environment and where they lived, but I didn't have the depth of understanding, for instance, how they cool themselves when it's hot, or how they hold unborn babies in their stomach if there's a drought on. The kangaroos, they'll hold them there for up to 6 months as a static embryo.
To put the pregnancy on pause.
Pregnancy on pause.
Really?
All this stuff, yeah. How they wet their paw and then wet behind their ears to get evaporative cooling. All these things I learned about our Australian animals. And in my final year, I took that to, of course, a whole new level when I lived and worked with Australian First Nation people, Aboriginal people, for my final year. And my final presentation was hand drawings on watercolour A1 sheets of houses made of found materials. And again, next to it were high-rise buildings and gymnasiums and all sorts of stuff, and my little hand drawings with an eagle over it all. Very finely drawn and beautifully thought through. And I went out to a community on Darling River, which is like 15 hours west, and lived with them and built these things. And, I topped the year for that because I was being supported by very intelligent
Great.
professors.
Okay. So you actually had an opportunity to build some of the stuff you...
Well, I created the opportunity. It wasn't...
Okay, yeah, of course, you created...
It wasn't permissible. We were meant to produce a civic building, within a certain perimeter of Newcastle.
Right.
And I said, could I please go out to Mallee Reserve on the Darling River and take a car full of tools and just make some buildings out of found materials for the community out there who were living in garages, old prefabricated garages.
Yeah.
I didn't get permission. I had to get permission when I was out there, but my supervisor said to me, Pete, just make sure you do the work so I can argue for you, when the time for assessment comes. But unknown to me, there was great support for my alternate attitude.
It's so nice that they recognize the value of that kind of also approach and that thesis.
Oh, yeah. Well, like I say, they were very good people, and I was very fortunate to be exposed to them and have their guidance and tutorship, stewardship.
And so then you finished, and if I quote correctly on some of your lectures, then you didn't immediately start your practice, but you worked for some company, for some boss, woman boss.
The cycle was, I finished and I wanted to start my own business.
Yeah.
So I started building my designs.
Oh, okay.
And I built 3 or 4 buildings, small ones. And you could earn more money building than you could as an architect in those days. And you're still the same, hasn't changed. And so I built 3 or 4, and I designed a house, and I was about to start building a small one, but a beautiful little house.
What do you mean by small one? What that means in square meters, or I
It's
don't know?
probably 90 square meters,
Oh, okay,
85
yeah.
square meters. It wasn't big, but it was a beautiful little house, and I was going to build it.
But that was for some
It was
client,
no, it was for a client. I designed it, charged for the design, and was about to build it. And he came up to me one day and he said, "Peter, I've fallen in love." And I went, "Oh, that's wonderful." And he said, "No, it's like I've been walking down the aisle with my bride, and I've walked past a beautiful woman in the pews next to me, and I've just decided I'm going to marry her instead." He said, "I'm selling the land and I'm moving to somewhere else where I've just found a wonderful apartment." So I was, without work, and in our country you need to have professional time behind you to get registered. So I thought, well, now's the time to work in an office. And I went for 24 interviews. I was offered 14 jobs, but I took the one that really was obvious. I walked into the office. As soon as I walked in, I felt good. I spoke to the principals, and they were very good people. And then it was a very demanding ad, and in fact there were only 2 people who applied for it. It was very demanding of you. And one of the directors said to me, "We're tossing up between you and the other fellow. Why don't you come with me back to my house in Balmain on the water and we'll have a chat?" So I dropped everything and went to Balmain, and we sat till 3 in the morning talking about life and possibilities. All I showed them for my interview was my book of Aboriginal drawings and faces and culture, really. That's all I showed them. I had no formal technical drawings whatsoever. So that's all they had to go on. And then I worked for them for 2 years. One of them became a very famous Australian architect with a gold medal and Order of Australia and all that, a lovely man. He came second in the Pompidou Centre competition, so very, very good architect. And the other one was more the philosopher, who recently gave me his life story in a book, very thick book. And he ended up coming to work with us for the last 14 years of his working life. He only retired last year.
In your...
In our office, yeah. Office. And he educated all the younger people. Lovely man. So I maintained a relationship with that office, but the day I walked in, I said, "I'm going to be here 2 years. That's what I need to be in order to get my professional practice." And I walked out on the day 2 years later and went to Papua New Guinea.
Is that the one you mentioned now? Because from one of your stories or anecdotes, I remember you were telling about your practice and that somebody somewhere else was meant to retire, and you said, "Oh, it's such a way." Yeah? That's the guy?
Yeah.
Okay. At that time I understood that he was a structural engineer. But
No, he wrote to me and he said, "I'm retiring. I just thought I'd let you know." And I said, "No, you're not.
You're not retired." Yeah, I remember that.
Coming to work for us. He did for 14 years.
Great.
So he was 84 when he retired, not 70.
So you were, he was, do you know that Japanese tradition that they put some elders in the job, and they said them, the guys who sit by the window, they're just there, or something like that. So it was like this, or he was actually...
No, he'd sit at the meeting room table, and then people would come and sit with him and go through their projects and be educated about,
that is so nice.
The traditions of architecture, yeah.
And such a great opportunity for the youngsters to have that.
They loved it.
I can imagine.
Yeah, they loved it.
So, okay, then what, you went to Papua New Guinea?
Mm-hmm. Well, I'd studied...
How did you choose Papua New Guinea? I mean, from maybe at your place it's a bit more logical.
Closer.
If somebody says here Papua New Guinea, it just... I don't know where.
I'd studied the First Nations people, the Aboriginal people in Australia. But what I'd learned a lot about culture, but I hadn't learnt enough about building because they're mostly nomadic, so the buildings are transitory. So there's a few that are permanent, but not many, maybe 3% of the population. And there were about roughly approximately a million Aboriginal people in the country when Whitefell arrived. So my uncle left for Papua New Guinea when I was born, and he went up there as a missionary.
Okay.
And every 4 years he'd come back to try and drum up support money to support them for the next 4 years. And he'd come back and I'd sit at his feet from very young, well, from being born, because he left when I was born, and listen to these stories about cannibals, about gardening, about hunting, about village life, and I'd be absolutely fascinated. So when I was working in the office I just told you about, one of my friends was invited to go to Papua New Guinea to work in an office there, and he left. And I was quite envious, but I was starting to learn that life has its natural progression. So I let it go. And within 3 months, my uncle had called me up and said, "We're going to build a church in Papua New Guinea. Would you come up and do it for me?" So I left the office after 2 years, and I used what money I had to fly to Papua New Guinea, and I began the design and drawings for a church for my uncle's mission. My uncle was a very fair man, very fair human. So whilst he was a missionary, meeting him as a lay person, you'd never understand that. You'd think he was more maybe a school teacher or something. He was very balanced. Whereas some of the missionaries I met were incredibly dogmatic and difficult, and judgmental. And so with him, alongside him, we designed a church. And then I would, they couldn't pay me at all. But what they could do is they had a couple of aeroplanes, Cessna aeroplanes, that they would fly their missionaries up into the highlands and land on little jungle airstrips, which are carved and continually carved because the jungle grows back and made airstrips. And I was able to get on one of those planes whenever I wanted to and go and stay in these remote missions. I mean, I was the second white person into 2 village areas ever.
Okay.
So very remote places. And I wouldn't have had access to that if I didn't have this. But in the sort of in-between time, I'd be in Moresby, which is the main city, designing and drawing up at the local steel fabricators' drafting room this building. So over a period of about 6 months we built the building, but I was flying in and out of the highlands studying a building called the Longhouse, which is a traditional Papua New Guinean building for social living. But the longhouses were designed to last anything between 3 and 25 years. So they had a degree of permanence about them. So their structure and their social understanding and their sizing was all very, very relevant to the amount of time they were designed to exist as buildings, protected buildings. And I studied them for, many years, but I've actually lived on and off in Papua New Guinea for a couple of years. And most of that time was in the highlands.
But did you do any private commissions or stuff like that? Because
I did. I actually designed a church.
That church, for which you were not paid, probably didn't. Just for that, you wouldn't be able to stay there for so long.
Well, my accommodation was paid for, and my food was
even
paid.
After the church was done.
Yeah, I designed a church for the university, and I designed a church in the Highlands as well.
Okay. You should have started something like Sagrada Familia. You have a lot of time.
It was more.
I mean, it would take longer, so you would be able to a longer commission.
It was more a service than a commission.
I understand.
And I was living basically on funds that I'd accumulated while I was working in Sydney. So I had very little costs, minimal costs, because when I landed at a mission station in the jungle, they would feed me. And it was their responsibility because I'd given so much time and effort to the church. And I did that, as I say, on and off for 2 years. But my ambition was to do a good church for my uncle, who was my mother's brother. So he was also a deeply thoughtful person. But it was also to study these buildings that had no waste. They couldn't afford to have waste because they would be reassembled in some way, or they would be dismantled and moved. And there was no opportunity for waste because it required more effort. So, everything about these long buildings, which could be anything up to 70, 80 metres long to 5 to 20 metres wide, depending on the type of building. Many different.
70 to 80 metres long?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
That's a huge building.
I think the Foy longhouses were the longest that I studied, but there are longer ones. But they're quite narrow because they have diagonally opposite sleeping locations, and there might be 20 each side. One of the most beautiful rooms I've ever woken up in is the Foy longhouse, because the light comes through the floor, because it's a woven mat, bamboo floor, and then it just drifts over the walls as well. But otherwise, the interior is black from the fires, because each of the, say, 20 fires has its own responsibility in terms of cooking and implements and all that. So you might be trying to sleep while the fellow diagonally opposite is eating. But what they're doing is they're producing a lot of smoke, and the roof is designed to allow smoke to permeate through it. But as it's doing that, it's leaving a black stain on the surface of the sago leaves. So there's a sort of matte black down low, and as it gets higher, it gets more and more glossy until by the time it's on the ridge, it's like a lacquer. And so this is incredible sort of almost reflective ceiling, deep, dark, black reflective ceiling that absorbs light on its edges and reflects it on the ridge. And it's, like 70 metres long. No windows, just an opening at each end. So it becomes entrancing. It overwhelms your traditional knowledge of buildings.
But what is the purpose of, I forgot to put that off. What is the purpose of those buildings? You said they're communal buildings, or?
Oh, they're buildings for occupation. That's the men's hut, that one.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's the women's houses are a lot smaller and more orientated towards children and food. The men's houses, it's a very interesting social system.
Try this one. If it's too strong now, we'll just leave it.
No,
sorry.
It's a very interesting social system because if the family of course, the village is made up of a series of families, but if the family don't particularly get on that well, men and women are separate in the villages, and the children can go to whichever one they choose. Usually the boys hang out with the fathers and they're taught hunting and all those sorts of things, but sometimes not. But then they all have garden houses, and they go to the garden house as a family. So if it's a strong family unit, most of their time is spent in the garden. But if there's difficulties in the family or they're not getting on well, they come back to the village, and that's where the men separate and live with other men, and the women occupy the series of huts, particularly in Foy, but that also exists in Basavi and Biami.
But do they have the notion of owning the house, or?
No, I'm not sure that it'd be ownership. It would be overall use of a place. And for instance, even in the longhouse, you know, that area is Gigi's area or whatever. That area is, you know, you don't, and that you can see his or. There are some longhouses with women, but not many. But you can see there's some tools being hung up, like a stone axe or whatever. You can see them being hung up in his area. You know, some people decorate them, some people don't. But it's very much a designated building. It's you know, people have their location, their place, and their responsibility. It's not a open. It's not open to interpretation in any way. It's, you know, you don't go and sleep in someone's area unless you're invited.
Okay. Does it feature some interior walls, or it's just one space?
Well, it depends which longhouse it is. Each longhouse is very different. So the Basavi have wonderful interiors. They have beds, and they have half walls that separate the men and the women. They have, like, where you sit, these poles that over time have become beautifully polished through the wear of, you know, the underside of your thigh, you know, and they're quite beautiful. But, you know, all these buildings have very low light levels. One, to keep insects out, but it means also that they have very few openings, which means the smoke is also an insect deterrent.
Okay.
But the concept of window is very low in the order of things in how you build something, because the most important thing is shelter. You know, the heat and the humidity. So shelter is primary, and then these places are the only places where privacy exists. You know, like we have privacy, we've got the door shut at the moment, we have privacy. Their longhouse, there's nothing, very little privacy that exists.
Yet another my consideration or a question, because they need to get along quite well together in order that functions.
I believe that, well, I know that the locations where you occupy can change depending on relationships of that, but generally that's understood by the time longhouse is set up, unless there's been some major disagreement or something, you know. But these buildings, I'm not sure if they exist anymore in their traditional form.
They don't build them anymore.
No. And I thought I'd lost all my documentation on them, but we found it all the other day, literally 6 months ago.
Really?
Yeah, I documented 45 of these buildings, and I don't think anyone's done that. Right. I think the best they've done is 2 or 3. So I've photographed and fully documented 45.
All right. Will you publish that?
Well, I've been trying to publish it for decades now, but it's a lot of work. I mean, it used to take me a week to document a building properly. You know, the spacing, the sizes of things, how it's bound, you know, the roof material and the spacing of the roof. You know, all natural materials. And, you know, say 70%, 80% of which rot away when longhouse is disassembled. But that I went there to learn about permanent architecture, permanent intuitive architecture, which changes from village to village or tribe to tribe because, number one, the climate changes, number two, the social relationships change, and number three, the ability for the land that they occupy to support the community changes. So in the areas where fertility is low, those longhouses are only designed to last 3 years, and that's where the cannibals existed. But on the Fly River to the west, those longhouses can house up to 360 people. They're huge, they're 3 levels, they're incredible buildings, and they can be designed to last 25 years. So it...
3 levels? I always imagined that it's only 1 level. 3 levels?
3 levels on the Fly River, the Gugadala people. And I went and stayed there for a while. And one of the images I show is a rosewood tree that's been felled, and there's a fellow with an axe carving it out to be a canoe. Incredibly beautiful. And then when I made some inquiries, the tree was planted by the woman's great-grandfather. So she had a canoe, so that his great-granddaughter one day could have a canoe. He planted a rosewood tree.
For 2 generations forward.
Yeah.
That's
sustainability.
Sustainability and thoughtful living, thinking
so
in advance.
All that, you mix all that up with the Aboriginal cultural awareness that I was, and the animals, and then subsequent scholarship to go to Africa and study villages in Africa and interests in other countries. I think my deepest affinity and appreciation is with Indigenous cultures. So, our more recent, when I say more recent, 10 years ago, work with favelas in Brazil, and now with desert communities in Western Australia. Whilst it's demanding, very, very demanding, much more demanding work than your traditional buildings, it's incredibly rewarding work because I feel that I have an intuition for it. It's not something I've picked up, recently. It's something that's become embedded and something that's grown.
And those early years, or even?
Sorry?
That become embedded in those early years you described before.
Yeah.
Right.
So that was 2 years doing that. And then I came back and I started, I had no money at the end. I had a small backpack of clothes. I had I think 2 changes of clothes, and they were shorts and a shirt and sandals. That's all I had. And I lived like that for a long time. And I came back to Australia. I mean, I went through like tribal fights and wars. I went through, making axes and spears with elders. I went through feasts and ceremonies. I went through walking for days through tropical rainforest, and I went through sitting at a rainforest cutting where the plane was going to land, and waiting for 2 days for a plane to land, or 3 days. Yeah.
You had to cut the runway.
No. I had to trim the runway.
Trim the runway. Yes.
But I went through a death ceremony, which was unbelievable. That there were some very significant experiences in that time. Prophetic experiences, one could say, and they weren't about intellect, they were about intelligence, different thing.
So, with only a backpack and 2 change of clothes,
yeah,
you founded PSA.
No. Yeah, I guess so. I landed in Cairns in northern Queensland because that's all I could afford. And in fact, I think I had to borrow $10 from 10 kina from my uncle. That's all I could afford to fly into. And then I had to hitchhike from Cairns all the way back to Sydney, which is at least a 2.5 day trip. So it was like over 4 or 5 days. So they had the opening of the church, they had a special opening of the church, and I attended that, and then I think I left a couple of weeks later. But I got to a location on the way back to Sydney, about 5 hours north of Sydney, which was a orchard, a nursery that my best friend from school had started. And I went in there, and he was there with his wife living in the shed where they potted all the young plants. That's where they lived. They had boxed off a corner of the shed and they were living in it in fairly primitive conditions, I might say. And I walked up the drive. It was right on the highway, so I knew where it was, or I knew roughly, and I found it and walked up the drive, and I had like long hair and just my shorts.
Longer?
Shorts, yeah, much longer.
Much longer.
Yeah. Shorts and shirt and sandals, you know. And I walked in and there he was potting up avocados or something. He looked at me and said, "I was just thinking about you." And I said, "Really?" He said, "Yeah, I'd like you to design me a house."
Great.
Can you believe that? On my way back to Sydney, caught a plane, hitchhiking. I walk into my friend's place who I haven't seen for like 4 years, 3.5 years. And he says, "I was just thinking about you, can you design me a house?" So I said, "Yeah, of course I can." I said, "I'll just go back to Sydney and have a shower."
And coming back.
So I went back to Sydney, I organised a vehicle, I borrowed some money, and I went back and designed them a house and built it.
And built it also?
Built it, yeah. So for the next 10 years I was involved with the building of 7 of our buildings in some shape or form, because that was the way you made a living in those days, you know. Being an architect with your own business was not
enough
in any way profitable.
All right.
So I did that for 10 years, roughly.
You did that by yourself, or
mostly by myself? I'd employ subcontractors for, you know, electricians and plumbers and that, and quite often I'd work with the owner, because in order to get the building built, mostly we took out owner-builder contracts, which was much cheaper than engaging a builder. And then I'd act with the owner and we'd build the house. We'd do all the engineering. All our early buildings we engineered ourselves.
You mean also electricity and heating and cooling?
No, we'd do all the footings and timber sizes. And
okay, you mean the construction engineering. Yeah. Nice. And so when then changed from this being an architect and a builder into having a studio and changing from this Glenn's business model of being one-man band to
Well, it was always really a one-man band, but what happened was that I started to get a lot more work. Round about the age of 32. So, I did a lot of building work. And I was still building a little bit, but I started to get more work. And so I set up a studio in the house we were renting. and I'd work as a builder during the day, and I'd work up until 9 or 10 o'clock at night working as an architect. I did that for 4 or 5 or 6 years. And then I employed someone. My first employee was a French student, and she was a friend of one of my clients. And she was, to this day, is a very dear friend, wonderful person, amazing person. And she worked with me for over 2 years, through 2 or 3, 4 years. How long did she work there? 3 years, 3 or 4 years. And then we won a national competition and a scholarship, and at the same time we were building our own house on the peninsula. So I'd borrowed $157,000 from my father. $57,000.
Okay, that's the house we have been in, on like going out.
Yeah. And I paid him back over 3 years, and I was able to pay him back. And I had to borrow from him because I owned the land. I bought it over while I was building, over an 8-year period, 9-year period, and I had to pay him back. He wrote out an agreement that I had to sign.
Yeah.
And I had to pay it back within 3 years, which I did. And build a house. And so the French lady and her husband stayed in the house and ran the business while I took up the scholarship and went to Africa and studied African village buildings for a year.
Okay, so you basically left the management and everything to that French lady?
I did all the working drawings for 3 buildings.
Okay.
She did the working drawings for 1, and I left 1 building with Rick, 1 building with Paul Follerus, a friend of mine, and 2 buildings with the French woman.
And they materialized exactly as you wanted, just from your drawings?
2 materialised, 1 didn't get built.
You said you left 1 with Rick?
Yeah.
You already knew Rick at that time?
Oh yeah, I met Rick.
How did you meet Rick? I guess I know the story, but if that's the one I think about, it's a very interesting story.
In my first year...
What's the time?
That's okay.
3.
Yeah, it's good.
Okay.
I've got to be there at 4.
Yeah.
In my first year of architecture, my friend said to me, "There's someone you have to meet. You have to meet this person." And I said, "Why?" And they said, "Because I just know that you'll love meeting this person." I said, "Okay." And I said, "Well, how do I meet this?" And at first she said, "Go and see this building he's doing, which is Palm House. Just go and see that." And it was near, my parents used to rent a shack at Avalon, and it was near there, so I was able to go down. The shack was owned by a friend of my father's, so we had access to it. And go and see this Palm House. And I climbed the rammed earth wall into this incredibly beautiful, imaginative, fairy tale garden that was largely naturally grown, but the owner, who was a magician with plants...
Who was what? Magician with plants.
Yeah, had introduced some species into the garden to give it further depth, which it had. He's a very clever man, very, very clever man. And all that was there was a terrazzo floor and a steel frame that defined the space. That's all that was there. And I looked at this and I immediately knew that whoever had done this, designed this, was the fellow that I wanted to learn from. I immediately knew that. And from then on, I must have been a pain in the ass to Rick, because I just followed him everywhere. every building site. And I did my thesis on him, so that's at university. I did my third year social architecture thesis on him. I lived on his site, so as you know, he became my close brother, really.
Yeah.
He took the place of my brother and taught me many of the things that at that stage in my life I was not good at. Patience, deep respect, integrity, all those sort of really important lessons. And he taught me to, like Mum, he followed up the lesson in beauty, and he also taught me many things I can't say, but needless to say, he's been singularly, along with Mum and Dad, the biggest influence on my life. Uncle Max, of course, was then another influence later on. But so I then, when within that period of working as a builder, I also worked with Rick, building his models, and he never got paid, so I never got paid.
He never got paid.
I'd be standing over there in this little tiny shack he had, like on a wobbly floor, building models at 2 and 3 in the morning for a presentation the next day, usually competitions, and building as most beautiful model I could possibly manage, being Rick. And he kindly and open-heartedly included me on his life, So we've been he's very much the teacher, and then gradually became, the closest of friends to this day. So that was also in the mix, and then, Uncle Max was in the mix, and all sorts of things. Yeah.
Yeah, knowing Rick, I can easily imagine, because he is just rather even not try to put it in words, but such a generous, warm person, thoughtful.
Generous soul, And that's 100%, it's not 92 or anything like that, it's wholehearted generosity.
Yeah.
So that's been a deep teaching, and started our own practice, and would often refer to Rick about things. Went to Africa, lived in 2 different villages, and did building work in the villages. That's often a good way of showing your sincerity, not taking but giving. Learned a lot about a more permanent tribal form of architecture, built again of the materials of the place, but very different because they were all singular homes, singular rooms, rondavels they used to call them, which are round buildings, different construction, except for the Huli people in Papua New Guinea, they had similar buildings. But then came back and started the practice in its fullness. So when I came back, the French lady stayed for a little while longer, then went back to France. I started working from the house we'd built, and I started employing people because when I arrived back in Australia, when I sort of was starting to finishing up the building, I started to get invitations from a university that I went to, Newcastle, to do competitions for big buildings. We did 5 very big projects, won by competition in Newcastle, and I did them in association with other firms. But I got to the point where I thought too much was being lost in the process of engagement. So in the process of, discussing it with the clients and with committees and with budgets. And I'm just experiencing that now with another university project where we've started doing them again. But I felt that the true origins of architecture weren't nearly as clear and visible in these larger public projects. So we were asked to do another competition, and I said I didn't want to do it, and I then made the practice solely residential. And as you know, we produced it. And so we were significantly awarded for one of these university buildings, and at the same time awarded for one of the houses we'd done. And no one had ever heard of our practice really at that stage, and we won national awards, 3 national awards for 2 buildings. And that's when people started to
notice,
look at the work we were doing. And that was after, I think the first award was in 1995. So we'd been in practice for 15 years.
Till then?
Yeah, we'd been in practice. I went to Papua New Guinea in 1980, so there'd been 15 years of hard work before any recognition whatsoever. And I keep saying that to my daughter Claire. You know, and she says, "Oh, no one's playing my songs." I said, "Well, it took me 15 years. You've only been doing it 5. Get used to it."
Right. Now that you mention your works, at my presentation, you made fun of me that I've said for 4 of my houses that's my favorite one. Which is your favorite one?
I didn't make fun of you.
No, I know. No worries.
There's no intention to make fun of you.
Of course, no. Maybe I didn't use the right expression.
Yeah,
it was not me.
I pointed out.
You pointed out. Okay, thank you.
Look,
which one is
someone
yours?
explained that the other day by saying you have a number of children and they're all your favourites for different reasons. And it's very important, as you know, having done many houses since we first met.
Yeah.
The relationship with the client is fundamental.
Yeah.
Without that relationship, really nothing else exists. And their ultimate temperament about the building is your ambition. That is, you want that temperament to be one of joy and love and passion and share and care and all that. You don't want them to move in to think, anything negative about the process or the building. That's not why you did it. Mm-hmm. And you're using all your talent within the limitations of that particular project to produce the best you can. So, given those constant circumstances, you'll never have a real favourite because the parameters are always shifting. They're always moving. So you can't weigh one against the other. So I look at each project as a continuing relationship. And just recently, a very close project to ours was sold for the 3rd time. The first time it was sold because right at the end of the project, the husband announced he was having an affair and he was going to move in with that woman. The second time it was sold, it was simply an opportunist, a family who were, maybe you could call them developers. Opportunists is the best word, who bought it for, I think it was 6-7 million and sold it for 17. So they became extremely wealthy from this house. And then the next person that's bought it is a wonderful man and woman, Buddhists, who want to return it back to its original state.
You're talking about Invisible House, or?
No. I wish they were doing that with Invisible. I'm talking about a different building. I don't want to name it because that then identifies the people.
Okay, I understand.
But he had never met me before. He phoned me up and simply said, I want this building to go back to its original state. And if we need to change anything, we do it respectfully with you.
That's so nice.
That's really the best one can ask for in terms of the longevity of your work. That your work determines that longevity. That your work has enough power within it and enough thinking to qualify it to be restored as a tool of both education, enlightenment, and sustainability.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and of course livability, but that should be unsaid. So we're doing this modification now for these people and getting it back to, but always I find that process should also benefit from the experience since it's been built. So for instance, one of our houses burnt down in a bushfire, and the owners phoned up and asked me to come back and rebuild it. And I said, look, could I rebuild the principles? And they looked at me, they're both lawyers, really good people, again, very, very good people. And they looked at me and said, what do you mean rebuild the principles? I said, well, there were principles of design here. And I went through the principles and how they worked with that place.
Yeah.
And I said, but I think I can do them better. You know, it's nearly 20 years since we designed that building, and I think I can make those principles, those same principles, work harder and work better for you. And so they accepted it, and we've built a building whose floor plan is not dissimilar. It is not similar, but it's not dissimilar. It's legibly, you could overlap it to a degree, but the building itself has qualities that are much more mature than the first building.
That makes only sense. I mean, it's logical.
Yeah. So it was great that they said that, because we're now able to do. And there was one time where they wanted to change. Well, they did change the bathroom, the way that I'd done the bathroom, the main bathroom, which I designed, knowing the site, which is remote, I designed it as an inside-outside bathroom so that you walked into the bathroom, it was like a platform into the landscape. So it was like a terrace on the building, but it was very hard to imagine where the edges of the bathroom were.
Yeah.
And they said, but I think we want to enclose it. I don't think we want it, it's a little bit radical. But as soon as it got enclosed, they went, oh, we made a mistake. We should have left it open. But there's enough of the advanced thinking to justify the building in its current form.
Haven't you done that kind of bathroom half inside out also with the wall house for Miyake? It's something like that, right? That's the principle, or that bathroom was even more open?
No. If you open the doors on Miyake's, you're bathing on the cliff.
Yeah,
really.
Exactly.
And but Miyake was an incredibly refined client. I mean, if you've looked at his clothing is was streets ahead of its time, and he wanted that in the way that a building was composed. So every time I'd arrive in Japan, he'd send me somewhere. And like once I arrived and there were 3 tickets to a drum performance. And so his assistant picked me up and we went off to this drum performance in a big theatre, big Japanese theatre. It wasn't long before I realised these drummers, the drums range from sort of 1.5 metres down to sort of 100 millimetres. And there was anything up to 5 or 6 drummers, sometimes 1. But it was a performance. But the vibration of sound in that theatre I've never experienced in my life. It ricocheted through your body, as if someone had turned on electrical current in your body. Mm. It was quite remarkable. And then I reflected on it for some time and I realised that what he was doing was indicating that it would be nice if there was a place in his building that took you to places that you hadn't been before. Like he didn't just want a nice simple house, he wanted a house that had moments beyond what you've ever experienced before. Moments of unanticipated energy. So, and then, once I arrived and we often went to restaurants and they were always good, but once we went to the best restaurant in Japan and it was like an emperor's meal. It was unbelievable because, he was treated like an emperor. He was one of the living treasures of Japan. Yeah. And I realised that there were going to be times when he had guests of that quality in his house, and he wanted them to feel a level of shelter that was more than just a roof and walls and a floor. That was beyond that. So we worked hard on that area. I mean, it was very interesting. And the bathhouse, he sent his driver with me to a bathhouse that was hours away from where we were staying. And we arrived at this bathhouse and it was very hotel-like from the start, from the entry, and I was quite confused. I thought, what are we doing here? We opened the door and went in, and the driver couldn't speak English and I couldn't speak Japanese, but I had a good relationship with him. He's a lovely man. And he guided me in and we found the area to change, and it was beautifully all lined in timber, no other surface, all timber. And we got into our bathhouse outfit and walked out into the corridor, and there in front of me was a huge bath, bigger than I've ever seen, and then a series of the small baths that you take before you get into the bigger bath, and they might be electricity, milk, mineral, whatever, cold. So you do that. It's a real ceremony, bathing. And then I got into this big bath, and it was remarkable because I think the temperature, they're all the same temperature, but when it's a mass of water, it seems to seep into your body a lot more than when it's a tank of water, Yeah. A tank of water sort of explodes onto your skin, but it doesn't really get inside, whereas a body of water, you seem to become part of it, and your body seems to engage with the warmth at a different level. Anyway, I'm sitting there and suddenly I realised it was very dark. It was an outside pool. There was an edge in the distance, And there's a few men sitting on this edge, or not sitting on it, sitting below it. So I drifted over there, you know, you just, like a crab, you go through the water. Never doing anything rudely, you know, you don't splash or anything like that. That's not how you operate in a bathhouse. You operate with respect the whole time. And I got to this edge and I went up against the edge and I looked at the other Japanese who were there and wondered why they were there. And then suddenly I looked over the edge and it was about a 400-foot drop to the ocean. Maybe 350, but it was a long way. And down there in the bay were a number of fishing boats. And one had the sense that the water was allowing you to float in the sky above this bay. It was the most remarkable out-of-body experience, created simply by location and water temperature. So the bathhouse that we did for him, that you identified, was to emulate that quality as best as possible for him, because that's why I think he sent me to that bathhouse. And so his bath hangs on the edge of the cliff. It's not as high, but it certainly has a very definitive relationship with the water. And, you know, these are all the little, I mean, what you've heard over the past, you know, time with talking is you've heard of all these accumulating experiences, and you're only hearing the tip of the iceberg, really. Accumulating experiences that have fed my appreciation and understanding of the way nature can benefit your approach to creating marvels within architecture.
Mm. So he was kind of, you could say, not just giving you clues what he wants, but kind of educating you of some
greater sense.
How old was he at that time, and how old was you?
I was 50 and he was 70.
Oh, okay.
Roughly.
Yeah.
Roughly 20 years difference. He died a few years ago, age 86, I think. So we did it in 2007, 2008, so 20 years ago, just under. So it was, I mean, my wife had recently left, and so I was feeling empty, and that project came along and just continued to feed me for like 2 to 3 years, you know. Just every time, it just fed. And I think that project, and I'm showing that one tonight, but I think that project allowed a certain resurgence to happen. Number one, the client was really, truly a remarkable person. Like, you only meet people like that 2 or 3 times in your life, really.
Mm.
And number two, he allowed the best of decisions to be made. He never.
That's so important. Oh gosh.
He never undid good decisions.
But you yourself said that at one presentation he said that the roof is too beautiful.
Yeah, no. Well, at the first presentation, I knew that.
I still remember that roof,
Yeah,
and then the one now which you did not.
I knew that there was too much structure, but I hadn't been able to come up with a reduction. But we'd done the most beautiful roof. It was an edge beam that was horizontal, not vertical. It was about 1.2 wide. And then we'd sprung battens in between this edge beam and got different forms as a result of the battens changing in length. And then we sort of fiberglassed it all and had this incredible quality of light coming through the roof. I mean, incredibly beautiful actually, and a roof I've never seen a roof like that before. And where it was down, or where it was on the lower sine curve, we caught the water and dropped it into a pool. So there's just drops happening from a singular point, because it was a dome, into a pool in the building, you know. I mean, it was quite remarkable. So we designed a model out of solid timber where we assembled this model in front of him in his samurai house in the kitchen. And this model slowly went together. It was about 600 long, 150, 200 wide. And as it went together, I explained the building and it was translated to him. He could speak English, but not particularly well. And he leaned over and he looked at it and, oh, very good, you know. And he walked around it 2 or 3 times around the table. Oh, wonderful. And then he stood back, he said, the roof. And I was incredibly proud of the roof. The roof is beautiful. And I, you know, started to puff my chest out a little bit because I'd worked hard. And he said, the roof, it's too beautiful. Now, what do you make of that? What a nice way to say it. I don't want people coming to look at the roof. So he didn't want to be the centre of attention. And he made that quite clear that this last period of his life, he wanted to be connected with nature. He wanted to be totally connected with nature, and that's the way he wanted to leave this earth. Not in an apartment in Paris that he owned, or the one in Tokyo with all the trimmings and all that, but in this raw, interpretive building that he'd done with an architect from another country that he never had to talk to again if he didn't want to. And caused no conflict in Japan by not employing a Japanese architect, because everyone can complain, but no one got the job. So they can't complain about anyone except for me. And I'm too far away. He was, you know, the only regret I have in that process was I brought the office over for the opening of the house, and he apologised and said he felt it was inappropriate. He was there. But now I realise that in fact it wasn't the right thing to do. Even though it was the right thing to do for the office, it wasn't the right thing to do for him. To bring 10 people to visit the house. So we remained good friends, but we never had the same conversations again.
Will you? Here, I had a few architects, and also my landscape architect and my carpenter also. And I asked them, what is their ideal client? Would you say that Miyake was an ideal client for you, of your choosing? If you would be able to choose the client, would that be?
You know, like, you learn something different from every client. Every client teaches you. They've all got enormous thoughtfulness in their life to contribute to the process of architecture. And his was refinement of design. It was the importance of ceremony. It was modern tradition. It was management of private and public. The other thing, anyway, the other thing I was told is that when Mr. Miyake moves on, that building might become a museum, so that had to be thought through as well.
Mm.
So, but then, you know, I have many fine clients, and one that immediately comes to mind was the Night Sky Fellow, who was
Oh yeah, you mentioned.
who was qualified in so many areas and so perceptive with life and so educated and intellectual that he was able to shape our attitude to design for that building in a way which no other client's done. And then there's the client who gave us ultimate permission on Springwater, you know, whose history goes back to nobility in China, like huge nobility in China, but he gave all that away to resettle in Australia with nothing. And he is possibly one of the most generous people, genuinely generous people I've ever met. You know, we're all going to his house on the 19th of July with the master class, and he'll put on a meal.
Oh, okay.
He is just a remarkable person.
That's the guy who Nina took us to, and he opened.
The Chinese guy?
Yeah.
Yeah. He's 84 now and still...
Which has a two-story gallery inside. Yeah.
You know, that they all make an extraordinary contribution to the architecture.
Mm.
They really do. And I'm not so much lately. There's been a big shift in Australia, but I've been blessed with remarkable clients. We've got two remarkable clients at the moment, house clients. We've got a lot of public building clients. We've got some remarkable Aboriginal clients at the moment, but housing is just costing too much in Australia. I had housing in this country is like 3,000 euros a square metre.
Something like that.
You know, in Australia it's maybe 8,000 a square metre.
Well, but,
no, but I'm just saying.
the salaries are also much lower here.
Anyway.
Yeah, but yeah, I understand that. I definitely share your sentiment. I mean, through my practice, I met, as I told you before we started, such a beautiful, generous, nice people that if I think back, or even now, practically all my friends are coming from this pool of clients.
No, it's wonderful.
Yeah. And I feel the same. You mentioned, it's funny, I wrote here in my brief to prepare for this, and when you mentioned your houses as a kids, I also, you feel them like babies, like your babies you give away for adoption, okay, and you hope that it's for the best, and but it's that's why I mentioned maybe really 4 of them. Definitely that one, and that one, and that one, and that one, and that one also. So it's, I really have a deep connection with those, and it's hard to say this one is because each one has some stuff. I need to wrap it up a bit because I have so many.
We've got another 25 minutes.
Yeah. Because I wanted to talk about how Glenn Murcutt Master Class came to life, how you guys met. I wanted to talk about your architectural practice, how that works, because that's very valuable to me to know how to run mine.
What else did you want to talk about?
about the future of architecture and our profession.
Okay.
So maybe we just pick one and see where that gets us.
We can deal with all of those.
Okay.
So after really coming out of nowhere, you know, we won some awards and became sought after, and started doing a lot of buildings. And at that stage also Newcastle University, where I'd been educated, asked if I would teach there. So I went up there. I'd already taught at Sydney University in Canberra, you know, just for a year as a tutor or whatever. So I went up there in 1998. I taught there as a conjoint professor in 99. And Lindsay Johnson became the head of school. One of Barry Maitland had left and Lindsay became head of school. And I convinced him to get Richard Leplastrier up there as well. Probably a selfish act, but of enormous benefit to the students. And Rick had a tough time at Sydney University, so he's happy to do that. And we'd drive up together, 2-hour drive together, and we'd talk and share. It was wonderful. Every Wednesday, it was just amazing. And in the second year of doing it, Lindsay approached me in the corridor. He'd been made head of school, and they've just told him that no longer would he be head of school because he didn't have a doctorate. And he was running that place brilliantly. I mean, brilliantly. You know what Lindsay's like. It was just...
Yeah, I know.
And he was desperately sad. So disappointed that he'd come out from Ireland, he'd worked his way through the system, he'd become head of school. Everyone agreed to the appointment, but there was a policy in the university that no one should be head of school without a doctorate. So he passed me in the corridor and he said, "Stutch," he said, "I'm thinking, you know, what alternative there is to university?" And we both talked it through. And I said, well, Rick's always talked about, you know, a sort of guerrilla type university outside the formality of university structure. And I said, I'm sure that if we included Rick in this conversation, we could come up with some sort of approach to architectural education that was more relevant. And he said, that's what I'm thinking. So I spoke to Rick about it, and we both saw it as a huge potential. So we went back to Lindsay and said, well, we think it's a goer. And Lindsay said, I've been thinking about it, and I don't think we can do it without someone like Glenn, who's a big name and who will attract people. So we said, oh, we can easily ask Glenn, see if he's interested. So Rick and I went to see Glenn the following Thursday. And we walked into Glenn's house and sat down with him and had a cup of tea. Rick, having been a very good friend of Glenn's for a long time, me having been a good friend of Glenn's for maybe 15 years at that stage, I used to call Rick for aesthetic advice and call Glenn for professional advice. And they both openly and generously give it to me to run my practice. And so Glenn agreed to 1 year, 2001. Went back to Lindsay and said, we've managed to get Glenn on board for a year. That's how it started. And of course, the principles were simply the principles we were practicing architecture by. It wasn't like we had to sit down and say, what are we going to teach?
It was,
or how we're going to teach.
Naturally.
It was just very obvious what we're going to teach. And it's evolved into the longest continuing masterclass in the world. And also, it has created the most amount of change in people's lives. If you look through the register of who's changed their practice or the way they practice or the way they operate or the orientation of their practice, and I think it's 30% of people that have done the course. And it's not uncommon to hear people say, it changed my life. And then, after the one we just did in Slovenia recently, a number of students have written saying, we don't want to learn architecture the same way anymore, we want to learn it differently. And I think because it was a long bow, it wasn't ever going to be easy, because really we all teach slightly differently, but the emphasis is on respect. I met Uncle Max in 2000. He loved the building I just mentioned before that got the national award, the little house, Israel House. He loved that building. And he wanted to meet the architect. I met him and he looked at me and said, "Did you hear the old men singing?" And I went, "What old men?" And he said, because I met on the side, he said, "Over there's been ceremony for thousands of years." He said, "You can hear them singing." I said, "No, I didn't hear them singing, but I did move the house from up there to down there as a respect for the cliff." And he said, "That's why I want to talk to you." He said, "That's one of the best moves I've ever seen in building architecture in this country." And we became friends and worked together for 22 years. And then we invited Uncle Max, traditionally taught Aboriginal elder east coast of Australia. We invited him to teach in 2004, St Thomas Brick, and he became, an equal amongst the teachers, and his teachings were very different, as you know, but very real. So I worked a lot with Uncle Max and continue to, even though he's not with us, but his spirit certainly is with us. And Master Class was born. We will have our 23rd, I think, or 22nd Master Class next month. And it'll be Glenn's 90th birthday at the same time. Glenn and Rick are, getting on. So I'm not sure how much longer it'll be around, but it's been a real privilege to teach with those fellows and to feed our wonderful architecture fraternity with knowledge that has otherwise been dismissed as past, but has a rich history and evolution.
Yeah.
And that's what we were teaching last week. As you know, I'm the young guy.
Yeah,
So
young fella.
I still got a responsibility.
Young fella, big fella, and
young fella, tall fella, and
a tall fella.
boss fella.
Boss fella, yeah, old fella. Glenn is the oldest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that then Richard and I wanted to prioritise students, so we started a student master class, and people from all over the world come to that. And we hope to be doing 2 for the next few years, 2 a year. And then we started to get invitations from people like yourself saying, "Can you come and do one in Slovenia or India or New Zealand or America, all over the world," so that people didn't have to come to us. We could come to them, which was a cheaper exercise and more sensible in terms of carbon footprint and all that. So the outcome has been unpredictably beneficial to ourselves as much as to the students.
Yeah, I think that you left a huge imprint in basically everyone who ever attended any event, any master class, either the master class or the student master classes. So Okay, mine was maybe even more different experience because it changed my professional path, but even, as you said, students are writing how, let's say, just last time I went with Eva, and she said how influenced her architecture and everything to be able to participate there and listen to.
Well, I mean, the thing is that energy of teaching will disappear. And you say, what's the future of architecture?
Yeah.
I mean, unquestionably, AI is going to figure in the future of architecture.
In what sense, you mean?
Oh, I think already people are. I mean, I had a client turn up recently with AI images of the building he wanted. And that's going to become, as you know, having been in computers yourself, that's just going to become popular because it's accessible. And people can perceptively avoid architects by doing it. I mean, you've got to think that through. That's what's going to happen. So where do we lie as a profession? We're going to be holding on to our values as much as possible, but I think those values will eventually become sought after. I think they'll eventually become very valued. Much the same as, a gemstone that's being mined and is starting to become rare. It becomes sought after.
Yeah, that's the way I perceive it as well, because of course somebody can turn out with images what he wants, and even before, I don't know how was at your practice, but people were coming with some floor plans already sketched, and I joked because they said, we don't know whether we should show it to you or not, and I said, yeah, sure, you need to show it to me so that I know that I will do differently or stuff like that. But I think that some generic architecture can definitely be done by AI and rendered and everything, but the architecture you are practicing...
Human spirit is under siege, and it's very understandable because basically humans are followers and they follow the leader, and if the leader's going down the wrong path, they don't even question it. They just follow it because that's the line of least resistance. So it'll be challenging for people who see otherwise. It'll be a challenging 5 years, but my feeling is it'll be an important 5 years because that traditional knowledge passing has a lot more depth and relevance to surviving these days than it's ever had.
Yeah.
I mean, just in the car coming here with our dear friends, Neil and Marina and Fernanda and Marisha, we were talking about children and mental illness and how mental illness is rife in communities now.
Rife? What that
Rife
I'm
means,
not familiar with it.
rife means everywhere.
Oh, okay.
Is almost epidemic proportions. I don't understand why we can't analyse these things really simply. When I was young, there was no mental illness like that, very little. I can think of one person at school. Maybe it was being hidden, but I don't think so. Now, my daughter's had 3 or 4 friends commit suicide. We have numbers of mental illness that is unimaginable. it's not that hard to understand why. When you have a phone that can access anything with no wisdom or guidance behind it, but simply facts, and you have the potential to use that instrument 24/7, so you can never get away from bullying, you can never get away from what's appearing on the phone to taunt you or to mislead you, misguide you. That's a pressure which we've never had before in our lives, in our history of human patterns and behaviour. So we're heading into a time when humans, potentially there'll be a lot of self-destruction with humans. There already is. I mean, what's the logic of the Ukraine warfare and the Israeli, what's the logic of that? I mean, one can say, well, you know, traditionally we've had wars over generations and generations, but not like these ones. These ones are very selfish wars. They're not managed in any way. They're just pure. And they're being fought on levels that, I mean, Neil was just talking about a fellow he's employing with one arm because he's Ukrainian. He had his arm blown off and it's meant to be normal, you know. I mean, you can say we've had all this in the past, but not quite like it is at the moment. The illogical nature of things is becoming harder and harder to decipher or make sense of. So, future of architecture and the future of any profession is under siege. I mean, doctors or specialists now are just hitting an AI button and saying, well, that's your problem. Putting in what the issues are, and that, you know, these are the three options you've got. Lawyers, 50% of their work will be done by computers, you know. But what we're not recognising enough is that these AI centres soak up energy consumption and water consumption like nothing else has ever done before. Much more,
especially energy.
Much more than power stations, you know. So if you have too many in a community, you're going to be requiring energy that you've never required before. So suddenly, you know, energy manufacturing will become huge. And therefore resources will become depleted even more than they are now. And we'll have this strange imbalance where if you don't have enough energy, you don't have enough AI to keep up with the other countries. So the whole world is about to shift. And the only, I think, one of the few professions that has the potential to stay outside that is architecture. That is
you really think so?
Well, that is the truly creative people. I mean, I don't think that the mind is working strategically anymore. I think it's working functionally. So that people are saying, well, you know, we'll use the AI for that and we'll produce it here and we'll make some, whatever they're doing. They're not sitting back and going, is that the right thing to do? You know, are we heading in the right direction here, or should we shift the whole momentum of this? So strategically that we might have 5 tough years, but after that it'll be really worthwhile. I think people are just walking down this path blindly, quite frankly. And it's a race. The AI thing is a race. It's like an arms race.
Yeah, yeah, definitely it is, of course.
You know, and now countries like the UK are saying, you know, unless we have enough money to develop AI, we're going to fall behind.
I've heard a few conversations on the topics, but
So
it's
where do buildings like this sit in that whole conversation? And I think they sit just as art has sat for thousands of years. I think they sit elitely, and that the majority of humans will follow the path, but there'll be significant thinkers that want to avoid the trappings.
Yeah, that's my belief as well. There always were, and it's always somebody who wants to.
How can AI appreciate the sunrise that changes every day?
No, there's no way. AI can probably read a lot of essays on that topics, but
No, but they you know, to walk
cannot.
down to the beach and watch sunrise, and Uncle Max used to say, "Thank you for this new day, unlike any other day we've ever experienced."
Yeah,
So, you know, the mere fact that that day is unlike any other day means it's unregisterable.
exactly.
And there's a lot of things like that.
A lot. If we dive into that, there is a number of thoughts that came to mind, which would be great to discuss, but you will probably be late for the lecture then, because we would stay there here for another few hours. Is there something maybe that you think we should have talked, but I missed?
I think there's a million things that we missed, you know.
We missed, okay, but that in the scope of this conversation.
We've been pretty thorough on influences, you know. We haven't talked really at all about product, about the work we do in terms of the intent of the work we do, or the mystery of the work we do, or the objective of the work we do. You know? So that's, I think, something that is broadly undiscussed. And probably haven't talked a lot about what's happening today in terms of people and time that might be affecting our work. You know, there's large sections of architecture and life that are not yet discussed, but could be at another time.
Yeah, that brings us to the fork. Either we dive into those topics, and you missed the lecture and you missed your rest, which you probably need.
No, I've got a bit of preparation to do, that's all.
Okay.
Before the lecture.
And so on, or...
No,
it would be great. You just mentioned a few things, just you said, mystery of the work we do. I can imagine we could talk about that.
Well, I'm not sure that there's many people internationally who really allow nature-landscape to play such a significant role in their thinking in terms of producing architecture. I mean, that's what we dwell on in terms of coming up with an approach to how we occupy the site with the building. That's what we dwell on a lot. And recently I had to present to a group of Aboriginal elders, a wonderful group of elders, even numbers, women, men, over in Western Australia for a project over there, an elders camp. And I did the presentation, and there wasn't one moment where I thought to myself I shouldn't be saying or presenting those thoughts about landscape or spirits or, you know, unseen and seen values and reflecting certain things in a certain way through a building in terms of landscape or patterns or people or whatever. And when I finished, one of the elders said, "Thank you so much for dignifying our culture." But when I finished, I thought to myself, you know, that was one of the most comfortable presentations I've ever done. And I realised that it was comfortable because I was very much talking to overlapping and similar minds. I wasn't talking to foreign minds or people who didn't appreciate what was being said. So, as a summary of today's work, that's a very good example of where we place our thinking. And that takes a long time to develop because it's all words up until you build it.
Exactly.
You know, and then it can be translated in a million different ways, but really it was so nurturing to see these Aboriginal elders listen and appreciate the building exactly the same as I'd presented it. They simply said, "We don't want to change anything." And there's nothing to do with a lack of architectural education there. There's everything to do with feeling and care. And they can redirect thoughts in the most strategic of ways, but that didn't happen. So our current work is very easily story told, if you want to hear the story.
Yeah.
You know,
stories are such a powerful tool as well to present or to teach, or both sometimes.
So that's where we could finish up, I think, at this time.
I wanted, last time you were doing barbecue or grill or whatever, you again pulled the rug under my feet and told me to ask me to tell you a story. So I wanted to parrot that and return the favor, but you already did, so I wouldn't go to that. I think I would really like to thank you again. I mean, it means a world to me that what you have done for me, for my life. Coming here for the first time for that immersive School of Architecture. I'm really happy to see what it grew out of that as well. And Marusha and Dana going there and everything else, and Eva. And also taking the time. I know that Marusha has a tight schedule, but she was generous enough to lend you to me for a couple of hours. I just knew that it will go like this, and maybe it's even fortunately that we had a limited time, because otherwise that might be going for a few more hours.
I mean, I think in reflection, you'll see that, or you'll compose whatever it is you compose out of this. But it'll be more about humanity than it will be about architecture. It'll be more about how one tries to understand progression and integrity and refinement in one's life in order to make better use of oneself socially.
Yeah. And that was actually my intention. because we know your architecture, we know your work, you have plenty of lectures, presentations, stuff like that. I wanted to know more about you, what carved you, what
Well, you know, it'll be
shaped you,
yeah, and it might give other
made you
peop-
what you are.
might give other people an avenue for owning their own history
Yeah.
in a productive way.
Peter, thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Deeply appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you to your very patient coming there.